Hello, everybody. This is Howard Blumenthal, and we are here for the, I believe, 42nd episode of Reinventing School. We began this when the pandemic made everybody kind of hang out at home and, couldn't move around much. And we started looking into how does school work and how might school work or how should school work when we get into, the post-pandemic era that thankfully now we're beginning to see glimpses of. In the past, for much of this calendar year, in fact, for much of 2021, we've been looking at what we learn in school and how school is organized on the theory, basically, that there's just short of 10,000 hours of instruction in K through 12, actual sit down and learn. And the largest portion of that goes to mathematics at about 15%. Science, less so. Social studies, even less so, because it doesn't seem to begin in earnest until somewhere around grade 6. Language arts from the beginning. And when you add all those things together, there's not a whole lot of time to not only do music and arts and health and physical education, but anything new, like robotics or coding or any of the other. So somehow we all have to live together in this 10,000 hour domain that we've created. But it doesn't look so far as though math is willing to yield much territory, and yet everybody else wants some more. So the reason why we're doing this bunch of episodes is to try to kind of shed some light on that. But along the way, there are big questions being asked and being answered by our wonderful guests, including how much time do you need? Is it necessary? Should every kid learn that? What do we expect every kid to learn? Why do we expect that? Why is that important? What are they going to carry with them? When we did the health episode, you know what? We're going to carry a lot of health information with us for our whole lives. I don't know whether other subjects have that characteristic, but they have others. And that's where this gets very interesting. So with us today are 5 people who are very familiar with music education. And I'm guessing that everybody took some level of interest when you were in the K-12 curriculum yourself. So give us a sense, just to begin, of you as a kid before you decided, and then the moment when you said, you know what, I could do this. So Brandy, why don't you tell us who you are, where you are now, and those early years and how you got to a decision.
Yeah, so I'm Brandy Waller-Pace. I'm currently in Fort Worth, Texas. I am executive director and founder of a music ed nonprofit, Decolonizing the Music Room, and I'm currently a PhD student in music education at the University of North Texas. I taught in Fort Worth public schools for 11 and a half years, and my last semester was that first COVID semester. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, though, and I thankfully grew up in a county where I had thorough grade school music, kinder all the way up through 5th grade, and then 7th grade became a choral kid all the way through high school and went to a magnet high school for the arts. And so having music in my life at home through my own parents' music and their interest, and then side by side with school, was just something I had throughout, and my interest branched out wider and wider. And thankfully I had educators who made me feel welcome and made me feel like I could be, the quirky kid and kind of get into some other stuff that I might not have found otherwise. So went off to college, actually went to college for dance, and got there like the first week and was like, I think I'm gonna do music. I like hurt myself and was like, I don't think my body can do this, but I can still do music. So I went to jazz studies at Howard University, got my undergrad and grad there. Intended to perform, but it, always got into something instructional, be it private lessons. I was graduate teaching assistant. I had friends asking for help and was like, I think that teaching thing's pretty cool. So when I moved down to Fort Worth, and I looked at what I could do that was consistent, we think about practical things, hourly pay, insurance, all of that. I was like, what can I do that can get that, but actually love it? And I actually can see a future and some type of, like I'm giving something in it and getting something from it. And I was like, music, and I've taught in other capacities. So I love to try that in school, and thankfully got a job, got alternatively certified, and got tons and tons of training. And it just, here I am. It was pretty awesome.
Cool. Scott, tell us about your adventure? At what point did you go, well, I could do this?
Well, I think like for so many of us, it's one of those things where you didn't really have a choice. It was just a matter of what kind of outlet you were going to express that through. So, same sort of deal. Went up through the grade school system and caught fire there. Um, Went off, joined drum corps, and played there. And I was actually teaching marching bands before I got out of high school. So I had 10 years of teaching, of outside of the purview of normal, school teaching, but just the school of hard knocks, learning how to screw up and save yourself kind of teaching. I had 10 years of that by the time I walked into a classroom. And I figured out pretty early on that as much as I loved performing, I always had much more of a charge watching my students really catch fire and push on. So I knew right away, you know, that was where I was going to wind up. And so going to Penn State, and I did my undergrad and my master's in euphonium performance. It was disheartening how many, well, and I guess.
Well, slow down. Euphonium. Just for those who are not reading the subtitles, what's a euphonium?
A tenor tuba, basically. And from the Latin, phone for sound and you for beautiful, so beautiful sound. And that was my gateway drug to bass trombone, which is what I spend most of my time on now. But I was saying it was disheartening to get to school and see so many people who basically went to music school because they enjoyed choir or enjoyed band or enjoyed orchestra, and they didn't really understand what the putting in the work to be a musician. And so there was so much of a weed out in those first couple of years, and then you look around and the ones at the end who made it through the degree and all that, and they're in pretty good shape, and they were doing very, very well. So I was really proud to be, a graduate at that time. And then I went out and instantly, I went on and did my DMA work. Realized,
what does that mean?
DMA? Doctorate of Musical Arts. I did my
Thank you.
coursework out at Kansas and realized very quickly that I had, how do I put this diplomatically, no patience for academia. So I enjoyed the high school level and such kids. So I, went and finished up my teaching certification, got hired right away, and I've been doing that ever since in various capacities. And as I was mentioning earlier, I've gotten the chance to teach at all levels now, elementary through high school, and I've really enjoyed everyone.
Cool. Thank you, Alice. What was that moment? How did you get to that moment? What happened since?
I'm Alice Soy. I am an Asian American pianist and music educator from Brooklyn, New York, on Muncie, Lenape, and Canarsie lands, indigenous lands. And I grew up in the New York City public school system. But my first introduction to music really was through my family as well. And my mom worked multiple jobs so that I would be able to afford piano lessons. So I'm very grateful to her for private piano lessons and the sacrifices she made for me to be able to do that. In middle school, I was very lucky to have an orchestra teacher named Miss Jacobs in 7th grade, and my secondary instrument is violin. And she really shared with us the power of creating music together with a group, which is not something that I always experience as a pianist, since piano is so often such a solitary instrument and so much just for oneself as opposed to being with a group. And I just loved that feeling. And I knew really early on that I wanted to be able to create that for people, for kids, and particularly kids in the public school system in New York. So that really drew my charge. And I went to NYU for my degrees in piano performance and music education. And I'm currently pursuing a doctorate as well at Boston University. But I really love just going in every day through the pandemic, every day in person with my 450 children, pre-K through 5th grade, creating music together.
I'm a product of the New York City school system too, and very happy about that. They did a good job. Except I don't remember music like at all. I was there until 7th grade. I remember maybe the teacher sitting at a piano and teaching us a song in the regular classes, but only occasionally. I don't remember an orchestra. I don't remember band. I don't remember watching performances in the big auditorium. I don't remember any of those things. It's possible that I just don't remember, but it's also possible that it never happened. I don't know. And it just sort of, all of us have these very different experiences at school, and that's an important thing to remember, right? So, Cody, you are also in Texas. So give us a sense of what led up to that moment, and then sort of what's happened since.
Quick bio. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Cody Raven Morris. I'm the founder of Being Human Together, an organization that wants to debunk and have difficult conversations about systematic oppression, social emotional learning, cultural responsive teaching, or as simple as the health lesson I gave today in my choir class so that the young women could understand how their cycle worked. Why don't you know this? Let's pause music so you can understand your body, and the body that you have, it needs to create this music. And I teach at Crosby High School on the east side of Houston, but I'm from New Orleans. And so Howard, that's so interesting that you said that, because my first encounter with music education was a school that I attended at the time that has had massive reform since I attended it. They squeezed in 6 years of elementary music into 2 days. The first day, a beautiful Caucasian woman came with long brown hair. I will never forget this because the musician in me took a snapshot of this moment. And she came in with a trombone, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and cotton swabs. And she talked about the trombone. And I thought she was genuinely an angel in my youthful eyes. And then she played and played and played. And then she took off the mouthpiece, cleaned it, sanitized it, buzzed it, and then we all took turns buzzing. And that was 3 years of elementary music credit, was to buzz on the lip piece. And then when I was in the 6th grade, my next component was, well, all of us were in church choir, because the only thing that you can do with music is you sing in the bar as a lounge singer, or you sing for Jesus. If that tells you anything about the culture of where I grew up in Louisiana, these were your only 2 options. So needless to say, it was not encouraged for me to go into music. And they threw all of us, because we were in church choir, we all learned the song. And I remember I've been this tall, I've been 5'9" since I was 11. And I remember towering over everyone at the graduation ceremony going, "We're off. We're off," as I'm yelling at everyone because of my fantastic church choir expertise. It would be when my grandmother passed away and I moved to Texas, where fine arts was required, that I got to be in a choir class and I got to see people do this thing called music education. I hadn't seen it yet. I'm now 14 years old. I'm 12, 13, 14. I haven't seen this yet. People are making careers out of this for your whole life. And it was really, though the repertoire was beautiful and it was wonderful to sing with people, I just couldn't believe that people got to do that every day. That all of us here sit here, we do this every day and we get paid, which is pretty magical.
It is all of this is pretty magical and stunning to me that not only that people know how to do it, but a member of my family knows how to do it. In fact, composed the theme music for this Reinventing School show. So Steve, tell us about you and give us a sense of the before, the moment, anybody who might have helped you along the way.
Sure. For those who don't know, so my dad listened to a lot of CDs growing up. He was writing music reviews. So I was exposed to like pretty much anything under the sun. I mean, he wrote a book about a listener's guide for jazz, for orchestral/classical, like romantic era stuff, and also world music. So at 4 years old, I'm getting exposed to John Coltrane and Dr. Didge, the didgeridoo player from Australia, and just like and then my mom was a huge Beatles fan. So I have like all this stuff just kind of coming from all different directions, being exposed to it. But what was interesting was I always had an interest, but I never quite had I was one of those people where I had like the natural talent of I just sat down and I knew exactly what I was doing and how to do it. So I had the interest, but I didn't really have the kind of innate skills to back it up necessarily coming up. So did the band program like most other folks here, played the trumpet, had a lot of difficulty with hitting the higher notes, which as anybody who's played the trumpet can be a very difficult instrument to play sometimes. hit high school, and actually Scott over here was my high school band director, and we'd worked together a bit. I was in marching band under his baton, and had worked together. And it hit a point where I was really interested in doing it, but didn't quite didn't understand the difference between like saying I wanted to do it and actually showing that I wanted to do it. Like those were two very different things. I wasn't quite understanding entirely. So Scott definitely gave me the pushes that I needed of just pushing me harder in rehearsal and those kind of things. So it's okay, let's start again. Let's make sure you get it right this time. And I remember exactly the moment I remember a lot of my friends were playing in bands, and I always thought that was really cool. And I wanted to be a performer. That was kind of my main exposure to it for a long time. And I was also interested in composition, but didn't quite understand how, I thought I needed to have like perfect pitch and be like Beethoven to be able to do it. Otherwise I couldn't do it. I was like one of those kind of. But I remember deciding I wanted to major in music and try to pursue that to some capacity. Music education seemed like the most stable route to go about it. So I remember I approached Scott one morning before classes started, and finally kind of worked up the courage to be like, I think I want to make a career out of music. I think I want to go to college for this and do this. I remember he was drinking his coffee and reading his paper. And he just put it down. He put his coffee and his paper down. And he looked at me and said, "All right, it's about damn time. Let's get this started. Let's do it." And about dang time. My apologies. So I went to school for music. I went to Duquesne University. I majored in music education for one semester and realized I wanted to be a composer more than a music educator directly. And I realized that music education is a pretty indirect way to become a composer, majoring that. So I switched majors, jumped over to that, while also jumping over with performance and doing a stint with music therapy. I kind of explored a lot of options. So majored in composition, and then out of school, I actually got a job as an assistant band director at a school outside of Pittsburgh. So I did a few seasons of marching band and teaching that. And I also worked as like a brass tech from another marching band, at arranging, and kind of bounced around that for a bit, taught private lessons as well. And then, but I knew I wanted to be a composer. So I was kind of I was doing this during the day, then like learning about composition at night. And I actually found my own path with grad school. So I applied to a few schools like Boston University and NYU. They both didn't let me in. So I eventually found a teacher from NYU who I was like, I really just want the training. I don't really need the degree necessarily to be a freelance like film composer, really. It's helpful, but not necessary for what you do. And I mean, just within that one, obviously with music education, it's a totally different way of going about it. So I studied with this teacher, and then kind of went the film composing route. And then I ended up in Los Angeles doing film scoring, where I've been for about 8 years now. And that is my story.
Everybody's story is different from one another, but you all share something that I think most people don't, and that is you're really talented. I mean, just by the way, right? I mean, you have a gift for some combination of listening and then being able to reproduce and then being able to create on your own. And that's extraordinary. So, when I talk to teachers and students and people who train teachers in other subjects, the subject of talent doesn't really come up a lot. The subject of hard work does, and certainly there's a big component, having watched Steve go through it, of spending endless time just trying to perfect the craft and then figure out how do you actually turn that into some sort of an art and something that might have some commercial value or some aesthetic value. But that's not every kid. And I'll be a poster child for can't sing, can't dance, can't act, triple threat, right? I mean, so
I've tried.
I mean, I remember at one point having a little plastic black recorder and really trying everything I could think of to break it in half, shoving it into the closet. I hated it. So I was just not that guy, but I actually have one ASCAP little mini composition credit for something I did with another composer for television. I sat there and pretended. But that's about as close as I've been able to come. And yet I know it's here, and Steve knows it's here because he's watched it, right? But I have no way to access whatever it is, and absolutely no tools. But I'm at least fortunate because I get to talk to musicians because I've done projects related to music. Most people don't. But should they? I mean, all of that, a long ramp towards, you got a lot of stuff to learn in K through 12 education. Where does music sit on that list? Is it part of literacy? Is it something that we have to build that part of the heart or the brain? Does it open the gateway to other skills or other capabilities? Why are we spending time doing this? It's fun to listen to, except for the part where a bunch of third graders are learning how to play in a string orchestra. That's not fun to listen to, at least for me. So why are we doing this? And what happens if we didn't and we just made it all private instead? Like, is it serving a purpose?
So I think it's
Anybody grab
really,
that?
yeah, I think it's really important to talk about neoliberalism and the espoused goals of education, right? And so
Oh,
one
no,
thing
no.
that
You're going to have to translate what you just said into English.
we've got this corporate data-driven thing going, and it's frankly a mess. One thing that I noticed while I was teaching was the need to justify music through something else versus music being of its own value. And so the first assertion I have to make is that music has its own value, but also that music has so many contexts, different societal and cultural contexts. And so you can get kind of philosophical, right? Like, what is the purpose of music and engaging in it? But it depends on your community, right? And even like as a musician, right? When I'm playing jazz, it's a totally different function than when I'm like sitting around a campfire with my banjo. Like, it's just, it depends on community. And so I think the answer in what it means is, what does it mean for the community? What does it mean for that school? What does it mean for that particular culture? There's the amount of personalization and depth of specification that we tend not to get in the way that school tends to be run now, where so many of our babies are numbers.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Scott, I've been in the community watching the results of your building this for the community. And it feels great to walk along while the band is marching. It feels great to be sitting in the stadium and watching what happened to our students. But that's not most students, right?
No, I mean, we've got arts requirements up through the middle school level, at least in our district here, and after that, things become elective. I think the difficulty is that when we're in this kind of situation, like we say, where everything is numbers driven, Brandy, you're absolutely right, because we are out there fighting for every student we can get into our program, into the performing ensembles, and when you're talking about something that it takes a little bit of time to develop the skill before you start having fun, that's very different in this day and age where, everything online and instant gratification is the next shiny object. And you're searching for those students who are interested enough and willing to commit. And, that's difficult. Now, again, going back to what you said before about music's relevance to everything, absolutely. We're all music educators here who have been through, ed psych and everything about how music is the activity that activates every part of the brain. We know that it is, part and parcel of the math part of the brain. So early music training and what it does to, SAT scores and math, and its effect on literacy and language learning, these are measurable things. And the research is out there and the research is conclusive, but for whatever reason, it's a tough sell.
Funny thing that none of the math teachers have mentioned that, or the language arts teachers, or any other teachers.
And the students are assigned to them. They don't have to justify, at least at this point, they don't have to justify what they do. And it's a shame that we do, being that ours is the subject that really is the drawstring that pulls all of theirs into focus. Depending on which direction we're coming from music at, whether we're coming at it from a cultural context, or we're coming at it from a performance context. It's just a shame that we have to justify something that is necessarily supplemental to every academic subject they're sitting in every other room in the school.
The visual arts teachers had some similar things to say as they begin to move more into we are the way that people understand cultures in a far more effective, and music certainly is true as well, far more effectively than social studies would, because it has heart, because it has relevant history, because the kids can actually make something or do something as opposed to just listen and watch something. Am I on so there's a now it's just interesting to me that art, visual art, performing arts, including music, and health are the three things that you kind of carry. Like if you're 90 years old, you appreciate what you learned when you were a kid about those subjects. I don't know if that's as true for the more traditional subjects. Like it's just sort of upside down. Um, Alice, what do you think?
I have so many thoughts, but one of the things that I'm thinking about is just how music speaks to culture and specifically what students define as their own culture. So I'm just thinking in terms of, so often we think of culture as just the country of origin or the place that we are. But I think about my kids and even just what we're doing this week. And I have created a lot of unstructured time for kids to create digital productions that represent their voices. Because so often also when we think of voice isn't just the voice that we use to speak or sing, but also through digital means, and also through, you mentioned the third grade string ensemble. I love the sound of beginning strings. It's beauty to me. And through those notes and through what they create, they're expressing themselves. And that's very wishy-washy to say just blanketly. So for example, I teach a Black, Brown, and Latinx student population. And one of my fourth grade classes is predominantly boys, Black boys. And in that class today, we reflected on just things that are happening in our nation. And this is an ongoing conversation that we have. And through just their own thoughts without me prompting and just me creating a space to listen to what they are saying and truly hearing them. And then me not saying just thank you for saying this, but just truly listening without any censorship or any policing. Then they were able to use those lyrics to what they said to write down or freestyle or record their thoughts and then put that in digital production. And that, in my opinion, is a much more powerful way to express their identities and their culture, whatever they want to express and say about that, than me saying anything to them. So in that sense, I don't really even think that that's teaching. It's just creating spaces for students to exist within and also for them to share their ideas in ways that I don't think occurs necessarily in other academic subjects.
Yeah, you're right. You had a lot to say, and thank you for expressing all of those ideas sort of very like, okay. There's more going on here clearly than teaching people how to play a musical instrument. And there's also listening. So it's, again, sort of really deconstructing this. Part of the experience, the part that's accessible to everybody, is everybody, or just about everybody, can listen to music and derive not only some pleasure, but also some knowledge out of that process, right? And that's something that begins really early. And it seems to be impactful, at least, by my sample of one with Steve, you listen to a lot of different kinds of music coming up. I guess everybody did, but ours was just sort of like endless morning till night, and just from every country in the world and every culture we could find recorded. Cody, when you think about that, are you do you get the opportunity to talk to the entire student body and have them listen to the wide range of sounds, music experiences that you want them to at least be aware of? Is that something that's in your head every day, or are you mainly focused on, I've got a particular population of students who have a performance coming up? Like, how do you balance that?
It's a hard balance, but it's a balance that's worthwhile, because if it was easy, then that's how the slide to mediocrity happens. The slide to mediocrity does not happen quick. It happens slow, like quicksand. It happens like water coming to a tide, and next thing you know, you're covered in sand. How did it happen? It happens when you program the same lesson plans over and over again. It happens when you're in a rush because you have your own agenda, or when a school comes in and says you have X, Y, and Z that you have to accomplish, paperwork here, you got to perform at the Veterans Day performance, you got to do this thing. And so then you start regurgitating art instead of creating something, instead of creating experiences with the student in front of you. It is our duty to not only expose people to the, yes, curriculum, this and these aspects, that, so on and so forth, but to teach about ourselves through art, to have students discover themselves and the outside world through the medium. And there was a comment that you made earlier, Scott, that we have this habit of, well, you have to get X, Y, and Z down before you can begin having fun. But Alice loves the sound of the beginning instruments, right? That process is fun when we're getting in there with sixth graders or elementary students, or if it's a full film score that Steve is working on. The journey should be fun. And that's what I think music does that other subject areas don't do. In other subject areas, we say you have to get this down to survive. And in music, we do this because this is how we thrive. That's the difference. And yet we're out here pulling and grabbing at people to be in the arts and trying to defend ourselves, while everyone else is saying, here's nail, here's hammer, build. So that's an archaic mindset that we've maintained for generations upon generations of how quickly can we put people in a workforce versus wondering about the kind of people that we're putting into that workforce. That's why we have the social issues that we have. That's why we have the miscommunications that we have, because we're not worried about the quality. We're just worried about how fast we can get them out.
And
And
then there's
if I can
please.
piggyback on that for a second, we see it now in how students come into the music classroom, because there is the fear of making a mistake, the fear of a wrong answer. And the first thing I try to get out of them is to take away that fear. There is no wrong answer. Every answer you give me is right, or some are going to be more right than others. You're going to figure that out. But exactly like you're saying, it's getting them to understand the journey rather than having everybody be product focused.
And then there's the question of which music. So, Brandy, you've put together a nonprofit to ask that question, I think. Explain your thought process, what the organization does, and what the problem is you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so Decolonizing the Music Room has a mission to center Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian voices, experiences, and cultures in music ed. If we look back into the history of US music education, it's very white, Western European centered. And there's a certain period in time when it's like heavily assimilationist. Multicultural means another part of Europe that needs to learn to be like Western Europe, which needs to learn like to be like the US identity, right? Then we have our militarism phase and so on and so on. And then we get like multiculturalism light as we go through. And so what we're looking at now is let's not sprinkle onto a foundation, right? Let's learn some actual competency and actually learn some depth about the culture. What my nonprofit does is specifically counter narrative or disruptive or subversive, in that we are going to make that space and center those things which tend not to be centered, not just, here's the song and here's the thing we're teaching you about, but here are like the actual people and their actual experiences and the actual roots of cultures and of those things that are in front of you. And so like my time in the classroom was like, I'm going to bring in as much stuff as I can. I'm going to listen to what the kids want to do. I'm going to, and focus on like different ways of knowing. And it kind of makes me think of what Scott said that Cody piggybacked on, getting a certain level of competency in order to engage in a certain way is based very much on like a Western European performance aesthetic, right? And so when we have those spaces for those different modes of musical creation and those different musical traditions, like my son, he's 13, he was 12 when the pandemic started. Oh, it's been forever. Pandemic starts, he did not want to do music, but he wanted to play ukulele. So I got him ukulele, right? And so like day 2, I'm fiddling and he's playing the instrument with me, right? And it's because like what he's seen outside of the classroom is like we go to old time jams, we go to like a festival in West Virginia, and he sees people like living these musical traditions, right? But there's such a level of divide that there's this cutoff in what supposedly K through 12 music education is and it's a very narrow space. And like Western European classical, there's just absolutely beautiful music, right? But it's one aesthetic and it's dominated for a certain reason. And so for me, it was very much around having students understand different cultures, different spaces, different ways of knowing, and knowing that something from the outside was valid. I wasn't just pouring into them and they had to leave themselves at the door. So you speak Arabic, we're gonna sing in Arabic. Like it's just these things that they're not accustomed to. The students are so accustomed. Dr. Bettina Love talks about this soul killing process, right? You stop at the door, it's like, shut off all your stuff. We want you to come in and be what we are telling you the culture is. And so the goal is to disrupt that.
So, Alice, what's your take on that? And then I have a very specific variation on that question for Steve and for Scott. But go ahead, Alice, please.
Well, Brandy is selling herself short for sure because she does so much more than just that. But I just want to add on to the disruption. I think that so often, if we think of disruption as only happening from the adult level, that is not disruptive enough. So when we think of what systems we want to break and truly decolonizing the breaking of coloniality in America, specifically for us, what does that look like for kids? So beyond music education as well, when I ask kids to look at anything, what music, anything really, a book, who's writing the story, whose voices are heard, whose voices are not heard, are questions that I'm asking my kids to ask themselves. Even Google searches. I had the kids do a Google search recently on country music in image search, and all you get is white people.
Right.
And you do not get other folks who are doing this. But if we really look at the roots of certain types of music, certain genres of music, and don't even get me started on genres, because labeling of music is a whole another package to unpack, and that's a very Western idea also. There's so many cultures in the world where the word for music even is not separate from dance, and there's no specific word for music because it's so much part of the communal creation.
And then I do a lot of work with kids around the world, trying to have them explain and giving them a platform essentially called Kids on Earth that allows them to talk about their own lives in their own terms. And so I'm aware of what you're talking about, but I also see the impact but they want to speak English or they want to do this. It's like, yeah, but I wish you would just go your own way. And is that your own way? So I'm always in that sort of, I never feel as though I have a firm footing, but I don't want to have the firm footing because I want the student to be able to say what they need to say.
Well, that's so interesting that you named that, because I think from a very, very early age, we learn that English is the language and that anything else is not okay. Anything from ranging from our names as well, just not really centering, okay, like there are many kids that I have also met who have names in different languages, not foreign, not other world, just different languages. And with those different languages, why is it that some things are harder to pronounce or easier to pronounce, right? Those are the questions that I think are important for kids to ask themselves. And I just wonder often if there's someone who is a disruptor in their life who are really charging them to ask these questions from a young age, because otherwise there's so many barriers to break.
This is why whenever I begin those interviews, without going into detail, I ask them if they know the story of their name. And it's you see to the extent to which they're being funneled down a particular path, whether they know the heritage, how that heritage plays into the way they explain themselves and all that. But you don't always have, and this is for Scott and Steve, you guys are essentially working to a client in one way or another. Scott, your community, and I'm talking about probably band more than anything else, is that community that has certain expectations. So if you come in and say, we are going to do a program of music primarily from Bhutan, and I know you've tried things like that, I don't know how that works. With Steve, you're in a situation where there's a client saying, well, here's what the movie's about. You can maneuver a little bit. You can introduce some interesting instrument sounds. You can but You don't have the freedom that you might in a classroom. So how does it work on that side of it? Because, or those sides of it, either one of you jump in.
Well, in any community, you have to figure out what the baseline is. What are the people in the community listening to? What can you do as first steps towards educating the community? So for me, where I am, I started with, let's program more things by women composers.
When is this roughly? Give us a sense of time.
Starting about 15 years ago or more.
Okay.
I mean, so many, it's such a white male dominated business in band composing. And then, all these people started coming along who were fantastic, like Julie Giroux, Alex Shapiro, Ann McGinty, Jennifer Higdon, all started writing these pieces for band, and, coming at it with a completely different sensibility than male composers do. And something that was very attractive to me, and also approaching music in a very different way, approaching structure, approaching harmony, approach to melody and texture, all very different from how the established composers, quote unquote, would do things. And so that has been my entry point. And from there, once you get everybody's minds pried open just a little bit, they get hungrier to hear other things. And then you could start to bring in other cultures with much less or no resistance, whereas you may have had it initially. So it's really just getting everybody warmed up to the idea of something new and exposing them to it, teaching them about it, listening to it. And then once the chute is greased, you can bring in anything you want. And there's so much more literature out there now, multicultural band, female composers, everything, than there was 15, 20 years ago. So now it's just fun to look around and find these things and bring in what you think is going to work.
Steve, what about, you're reaching more people than anybody else here. When you write something and it's for a big client like a Microsoft or something, a lot of people are hearing that. So are you saying what I really want to do is bring in some new ideas, or are you obeying that? Like, how do you balance that? Everything seems to be a balance.
Right. So there's kind of two different ways I go about it. One is it's figure out, okay, what's the client's interpretation of what they're asking for versus what they're actually asking for? Like those can be two completely different things. They say oboe, they mean cello, like there's like there can be a total and utter disconnect with all of this. So that's the one tricky part. The other part is trying to do justice. Like a few years ago, I was asked to write, so I work with a company called Novel Effect. They're like they're a voice recognition app that basically accompanies stories that are being read out loud. The book syncs with the app. So music and sound effects play on cue, that kind of thing. It's a really interesting idea. It's a really fun thing to work with. So I was scoring, I guess you could say, the Jungle Book, which I hadn't really thought about the Jungle Book since I was a kid, and found out that it took place in India, which I just remember, like when I was a kid, I thought, oh, it's in the jungle somewhere, so I remember thinking, okay, I want to make sure to actually show Indian culture in an honest way and not just my own Western interpretation of what Indian music sounds like, So in my music education in college, I took a few musicology classes, music history classes, and I learned to kind of ask the questions of, okay, what makes Indian music Indian music? What are the differences between my frame of reference as someone who came up with the Romantic era classical kind of music theory training? How does that relate to this? Because I know there's a lot of differences, obviously, but it's a matter of doing it justice and trying to listen to it, but also trying to kind of like what Scott said, is kind of prime them to the idea of, okay, this is what this is. This, if you want this to be authentic, this is the way to make this authentic and represent, be representative of this culture in some way. So I read a bunch of articles. I spoke to some folks who specialize in Indian music, learned about talas and ragas, excuse me, and just kind of really made a point to do it justice and not just think, okay, well, I think it's supposed to sound like this, so let's just do that. Like that's been done a lot by people who look like me, and I don't want to add to that problem because that is definitely a problem. So it's a lot of listening, and just immersing myself in Indian music as well. Between people, Westerners like me, who interpret it a certain way. Okay, what's their interpretation? What's the authentic way of doing it? Where's the sweet spot where I can do the culture justice, but I can also have the client understand it and not have it be way too different from what they're used to or understanding. Fortunately, novel effect, my bosses were also composers, so they also were just interested in, wow, I didn't know anything about music theory with India. I was also very fortunate with my own music training in college, where one of my professors took into the Takadimi program, which is kind of, I believe it's called Takadimi, kind of similar to Kodai with solfege, but basically it's Northern Indian rhythm. An interpretation of that. So I kind of had a baseline of, okay, I know there's this and there's really complex rhythms happening. That's a part of the northern part of India. So I started doing research of like, well, where does the Jungle Book take place? Does it take place where that happens in India? Like you have to really, you have to kind of get down into it and figure out, okay, well, if it takes place in southern India, then stuff like Takadimi wouldn't really have a place in this necessarily, because that wouldn't be like, but you really have to do that kind of research. And that's it's one of those things where, yes, as someone who came up in the system that's very slanted toward, that can be very slanted towards Western music, it's not the easy thing, but it's the right thing, at least in my opinion, with how that's of how to do that. So,
and of course, the Jungle Book was written by Rudyard Kipling in the middle of the British Empire. So,
yes,
like there's no string you can pull that doesn't at some point get connected to the British Empire or some other, right?
Yeah.
So, and when we think about the music of New Orleans, for example, okay, we got a lot of cultures going through there, right? And when I talk about what is the story behind your name, there's so many different paths that are flowing through that. So how do, to some extent, you are helping to lead the way for other teachers, other educators to see different ways of thinking about how kids learn and what they learn and all that. Are you influential, or are you just the music department?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking the Alice or Cody or Scott, people who are in the trenches every day.
I think the concern comes up that we are influential, but we were hired to be the music department.
Huh?
I had a conversation with an employer at one point in time in my life, I have to be very vague about this one, in which I had a series of students come to me after a hurricane, and they wanted to be in my space and they wanted to be in the choir room because this was a place where we hug each other in the warm-ups. And if you don't want to be hugged during warm-ups, it's because you've expressed how you receive love and how you give love. We've articulated that, and that's part of how we begin to get our body ready for music making, so on and so forth. So they know this is a space that they consider to be home. I get away from words like safe space, because if we don't know, I will let you know that the word safe implies danger. So, but I think there's a reason why kids will still say safe, because they feel something else when they walk outside the door. Anyway, with said employer, with said person in power, the conversation that we had is, well, you need to leave, those things. We love that we have you here and thank you for being here, but you need to leave those things to the counselor. So who loves the kid then? Who actually teaches the child what they deserve? Who holds up a mirror to them so that they can see who they are, versus what I believe, have a curriculum pattern of doing, of saying, you come to me and I'm going to tell you who you are. I'm going to reveal to you who I believe that you should be. I find it really ironic that we have this mindset throughout academia in general to begin where the student is, and yet we know very little about our students. And if we took the time to just get to know the people who are walking in the door, we would know that maybe it isn't the best choice to program Haydn's Messiah for the 250th time for your winter concert. And perhaps you could ask the students in the room, what are their traditions in the winter season? Well, here I am on the east side of Texas, where a predominant, but not all, a predominant majority of my students are Christian and will celebrate Christmas. But this is not some sort of fraction where we reduce down to the common denominator of Christianity, and that's what we do. What we do is we find all the voices in the room and the voices that are absent, and we make sure that they know that they are being heard, because then you will equip children who will go out, and instead of telling people who they are, we have students, we have musicians and artists who will go off and be a mirror for someone else and use their art and their creativity to allow someone else to discover who they are. I'll tell you this quick little bit because I don't want to take up too much bandwidth, but I have a piano class here. And I personally am not the biggest fan of class piano. If anyone sees this and they have the curriculum, let me know. Only because I believe the instrument needs more time than an academic school day in a public school provides. And so then your class becomes a class where children either just can't succeed, or it's a blow off class, or that's one and the same, right? You have kids who do well and kids who don't. So I've been playing around with some websites and programs like Soundtrap, and DJing paid for my undergrad, and I still will DJ the occasional wedding. So I've been trying to bring in those skills, bringing that part of myself into the classroom. I have a student on the spectrum who is really struggling with the concept of clean your piano, play these scales, do these things. And I was struggling too, because I don't love it. So I said, well, what if we combine all these skills? The same kid who could barely get through the first 15 minutes of piano warm-up has just made a track that he sold to his friend for $30 as opening music for a podcast. And when that kid walked in my room the other day and I played their song and said, oh my gosh, this is amazing, he walked out of the room and he goes, wow, I'm a musician. And he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself. And he said, he named himself, I'm a musician. It was the cry that started in my chest because I couldn't believe it.
Is there any other side? I guess, wow, I'm an artist, wow, I'm a writer, right? But I don't think you say, wow, I'm a social study. Like, does that happen in other classes?
Back when I was in the high school, and Steve can back me up on this, I used to tell the kids sitting in front of me all the time, how can you go into something like this, stand in front of people and profess, everything you know about this and not be passionate about it? When I go to a math class, I want somebody who is passionate about math to make me passionate about it, because you know what? I don't like math, but I want to like math if somebody will help me that way. Part of the thing that I think pushed me into teaching of music was, and my music teachers were wonderful, but my English teacher, who in the course of teaching Shakespeare became so animated and so visual in the reading and the presentation of this, instantly I knew, I didn't realize it at the time, sitting there in 12th grade, senior English, I was brain sucking so many of my teaching techniques from the English teacher. And it was that passion that was evident. And I would hope I would see it in every academic classroom. Do we? I seriously doubt it, but I would love to see that.
Are there subjects where you feel kin? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, there's a real relationship between mathematics and music. For example, when you walk into a math classroom, are you thinking, yeah, they're in my tribe? Because I'm not sensing that. I'm hoping you're going to say, oh, absolutely visual artists, but I'm not sensing that either. It's sort of, you guys are doing your thing in your way, and there's a lot of validity to it, but you're also going way beyond what a conservative job description. It's like, just teach the kid to play the instrument, right? And you're talking about social and hugging and all these other, and it's like, oh my gosh. So as a school administrator, I'm thinking, on a good day, what a great thing. On a bad day, oh my God. Right? So how do you fit, or do you not want to fit? Is fitting the enemy? Like how do you play the game? Because you have an agenda here that's really pushing the 21st century, a way of 21st century thinking that's really different from the 20th century. And I'm not getting the impression the geometry teacher's doing the same thing.
So that's interesting. Sorry, Cody, you got your hand up. Sorry.
No, all yours. Yeah, go ahead.
It's so interesting, like even framing it as 21st century, right? I feel like I just went into the classroom and just kind of did what I do when I process. And I was like, I mean, you hired me to do what I'm doing, so I'm going to do what I'm doing. One reason I'm extremely grateful to have been concentrated in elementary ed is the pressure is not as high in terms of a product.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to have administrators who are like, I don't know how to do musical things. That's you. I don't send kids to the office. We handle our business in the classroom. Like I could just kind of do whatever. But for me, like it's not new thinking. It's just like I grew up in this like way of knowing and way of framing. And so now I'm just like really happy that I do not allow, again, the neoliberal stuff to like push me out of that. You know, there's always a certain like survival mode that you get in teaching, and you cling to some more traditional stuff just, you know, to be able to kind of make it through. But like your way of knowing is going to filter through, and then you get more self-actualized and embodied in that. And so that's kind of what I feel is happening, rather than like I'm, you know, I learn new things and I carry them, but you know, just kind of do what we do. And it's so individualized with those connections with others. Like, you know, I
Yeah.
was a dancer, so we're going to be dancing a lot, you know? And yeah.
Other perspectives?
Just to add to that, I think it is very hard to separate music from the identity. And that is also something that is so often just spoken about or is expected. So I'm a musician every day. I'm a musician when I'm not practicing. I'm a musician when I'm sleeping, in all aspects of that. And I think that this, even just the idea, first of all, your story, Cody, I'm like feeling that also this I am a musician idea, because I don't know at what age I actually started to see myself that way. But I know that every day when I teach my kids starting from pre-K, we end every class by saying, I matter, you matter, we matter. And I think it is so important to just name that, particularly for Black and Brown children, to say that for themselves. And then how does this then look like when you start to explore these different musical identities within yourself, right? And I think it's also important to name that we all carry multiple music identities as well. And it's okay that they, like, I don't perform every musical identity that I own in every moment, especially when I'm hired as a musician or as a teacher. Just because I have the Western classical training as a pianist does not mean I can't listen to hip hop and try to figure out that piano part in that song too. And then doesn't mean that I can't do this, right? These are all intersecting things that I'm just thinking about. And I think when I name that out loud to kids, when I just say what I'm thinking in the moment, that's where that real teaching occurs, right? Because they're seeing my process.
So let me ask two bottom line questions. One, should every kid have 12, 13 years, K-12 of music education? How many days a week? And of the 10,000 hours, how many do you want? So let's just go around the horn. Who wants to grab it first?
Yes, every kid should have music if it affirms their identity only.
So if it doesn't, then they shouldn't take it?
If it doesn't, they should demand to have music that truly speaks to who they are.
Okay. So everybody should study music, but it has to be relevant to their life. It has to be in a form that's relevant to their lives. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. How many hours? When are we beginning that? In kindergarten or like in 8th grade?
We're starting in pre-K or as early as possible. 3K, I think, starting soon in New York City for everyone. Okay. And for my school, every kid gets at least 50 minutes of music music or any other arts every day. So every day.
And how many of the 10,000 hours you want?
As many as the math will allow.
Orders. What do you got? Name a number. Nope. Okay. Scott?
I just can't do the math fast enough.
That's fine. That's fine. Scott?
I don't know that you can boil it down to numbers. Would I take all of the hours? Of course I would take all of the hours, but I'm much more interested in, you know, the quality of what I can fit into the hours that I get. and making sure that I'm serving my students as completely as I can in the time that I have them. And I think all of us who are educators are so used to squeezing so much blood from that stone, and at times making it look easy, that the people on the outside, administration, all that kind of stuff, you know, are comfortable scaling things back because they know that we're going to do whatever we need to do to get across that content that we want to get across to our students.
Kids should start kindergarten. Kids should start later. How much time should they be devoting?
Well, they start walking at what, 10 months, you know, so rhythm began then.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good answer. Brandy.
So I'm thinking more community-based and then into the school, right?
Yeah.
Like in utero music, right?
Uh-huh.
You start when they're babies. Like Alice mentioned, as you know, preschool is as young as you can get them. It's interesting. I'm thinking about how to be a Texas general ed music teacher, you have to also pass a music portion. So that cycle has to be like everyone should have music the whole way through, and it speaks to how it's just everywhere, right? And so I, of course, want all the hours, but what I want is a fully integrated educational environment where there are spaces to have those identities affirmed and where music has transfer. And the teachers I've had the best partnerships with, you know, I like them, but we also have a little something extra, are those that, you know, that's part of their lives, whether it's this teacher happened to be formally trained or this teacher just really likes to rock out. And so there's a space for that in their room. And so those things should just be interwoven. And, you know, everyone's got the after school programs or community programs and stuff. Like, we need to collectively have a space where it's like you can learn how to interact with and know music in so many different ways. And you can do it from the time you are teeny tiny until you die.
Okay, good. Steve, you got 10,000 hours. How many hours are going to music?
Yeah, I mean, geez, you're talking to the guy who, when I actually had control of my schedule senior year, I did every single possible music class that the school had to offer. I'm pretty sure I think I had one class my whole senior year that was not within like the music area of my school. So as many as possible. The big thing with me was, and I agree with everyone else who's spoken about, especially music that's relevant to your own experience and who you are, and not just here's the thing, here's the way. Like, one thing I've definitely learned in the past few years with like Western music theory, it's a way, but it's not the way. You know, like it's just another option of many options that we have to learn about this. But the big thing for me was, I had a thought there. Shoot. Basically for me it was investment. It was, I went to a very large high school with a lot of kids who had a lot of opportunities and a lot of parents who had the means to really back them and help them out. And it was really easy to fall through the cracks. And music class is one of the few things where if I expressed an interest, it wasn't, well, let's see what your grades are. Let's see how you're doing here. I don't know. This was great. I will take you as far as you want to go. And the more interest I showed, the more that was reciprocated to me. So that's kind of my thing, I guess. It's also the onus is on the student. And I mean, aside from the societal and the systemic limitations that are put on there, the student being given the resource and the support to speak up on, this is something I want to learn more about. Take me down the rabbit hole. I want to learn as much as I possibly can about it. I think that's also just as important. And as far as when to start it, I think it's as soon as there's any kind of interest or anything like that even shown, whether it's a kid banging on pots and pans when they're, before they can even walk, I mean, I think that's that's why I have for that.
Cody, take us out. Your last word.
Oh, well,
How would you organize this? All yours.
Great. You ready? Today, in my third period class, my kids walked in and I was in gym clothes and boxing gloves. And I said, let's play a game. First, we said good morning, because we all greet each other, because grandma said, everyone deserves a good morning, good afternoon, good night. With my boxing gloves on and the boxing bag I have in my choir room, I said, the game is you get to pick 3 numbers and they have to be 1 through 6. So I have kids call, I'm taking roll, Aaliyah. She says 2, 4, 6. That's my entire right hand boxing, 1, 3, 4, and I'm sweating. After I box, I lay out the yoga mats and we do a meditation and yoga together so that we can reaffirm ourselves that this vessel is going to make music. We get up and we go through their final concert music. Then we learn show choir programming. Then we take our phones because we're working on how we schedule ourselves and maintaining and controlling the time. So to answer your questions, before we have dismissal and before I show them a piece that I composed, because I'm trying to step into this world myself of writing and expressing my creativity in my spoken word. Yes, every child should have music. And not only should they have it to cradle to grave, but when you say how many hours in the 10,000 hour day, people owe me hours. I'm teaching health lessons. I'm teaching fitness. We're doing yoga. I'm teaching history. I'm talking health. I'm talking organization and executive functioning skills. My concern lies in the fact that people won't give me my hours because you go to that class and that's all you get. You get no practical application. You're telling me I'm going to use the quadratic formula, but then you don't show me where I'm going to use it. And that's why I think it's pointless. That's why. And I know it is important to know fraction because I left school and then I had to do taxes and stuff like that, but they didn't prepare me for that. They didn't tell me I have to do that. They just gave me a whole bunch of ingredients, but they didn't tell me how to make the meal. Music gives you the whole meal. It teaches you how to cook. It teaches you how to shop. It teaches you how to make a meal, and it teaches you how to feed yourself and other people. So I want all my hours. And I want to be in an educational system. We need to reinvent school so that the things that we are giving students, that we are feeding students, teach them how to feed themselves and willingly wanting to feed their neighbor as well.
Most excellent. Thank you so much for that. I hope you guys will all hang out for a couple of minutes after the credits. Here come the credits. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. For on-demand episodes and more, visit our website. Kids on Earth contains hundreds of video interviews with students from around the world. Learning Revolution is a global collaboration network for people who care about learning. Be sure to join us next Thursday for a new episode of Reinventing School. Thanks for watching.